the erosion of the value of money is actually eroding the value of the time and energy that we spent to get it. Bitcoin will absolutely demonetize residential real estate as an asset class. Bitcoin is like a giant metronome. Click, click, click. We're going to be powerless to avoid synchronizing to that thing. It's like the greatest magic trick that's ever been executed. It's almost like providing the planet with a uniform language. This is something that potentially dissolves borders.
Is Bitcoin the end of time as we know it? Is it just the end of time?
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Scott Dedels is co-CEO of Block Rewards, host of the Block Reward podcast, and author of the Dao of Bitcoin, Towards a Cosmology of Energy Money, which we covered on a prior episode here on the Bitcoin Matrix, which I recommend people go check out. So I'm super excited to talk to you again. Scott Dedels, welcome back to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast.
Yeah, Cedric, I was thrilled to get the invite to return, and I'm stoked to be here, man. It's great to be chatting.
Yeah, well, it came up. I've been eyeing what we're going to talk about tonight for a long time, actually, since, I guess, October. No, when was Canadian Bitcoin Conference last?
May of 24. So it's been like 15 months, maybe.
So when I saw the topic of that talk, I was like, all right, I'm going to do a show on that. And then, but I wanted to do the Dao, and I got the book from you then. So we covered the book first, and then I had the excuse to go back to the recording. And then I looked you up on YouTube and I saw the Bitcoin Alive 2025 talk. So I wanted to get into that. But I was just recently on your show, which was really cool and a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, we had a lot of really good feedback about that episode. I was one as a fan. I enjoyed myself immensely.
I had a great time. Yeah, I think we'll probably put it out on this channel eventually with your permission.
Absolutely.
But let's get into Bitcoin Alive 2025 or what you kind of covered there. So maybe let's start with, the topic was called monetary entropy and the value of time. So I guess let's start with maybe how is time precious?
Yeah. And I love getting up on stage. The conferences are so fun.
Well, you're good at it. You're a good speaker.
Thanks, man. I think it's if you enjoy it, it's easier, right? And like I like to when I get given those opportunities, I like to try and bring something that is outside of monetary history, macroeconomics, the stuff that like other people, quite frankly, know a lot better than I do. And so the Montreal one was really my first opportunity to do that. And that one sort of turned into some of these other ones, including this one that happened in Sydney in Bitcoin Alive in March, which was also just really cool because Bitcoin Alive is the largest Bitcoin only event in Australia, and just really neat to see what it's like, what's going on over there, like what are the Bitcoiners talking about, and if you've been to a conference, that there's all kinds of events that happen around it. Like people are meeting for beer at night, and it's just the people you meet, and so like super shout out to the people at Bitcoin Alive for having me, and I would I intend to go back. I love Australia. It's like
I spent a month there backpacking.
Oh, cool.
20 years ago, but I loved it.
Yeah. It's like one of those places that is maybe further down people's lists because it's not super exotic and it's so far away. But huge fan.
That's wild. Australia.
Yeah.
I went up all the East Coast from like Sydney to Cairns.
Oh, cool. Sydney's like one of the best cities in the world.
Totally.
Sure.
Yeah. Huge melting pot, beautiful city, incredible. It's like New York City meets San Diego or LA.
Yeah. So the value of time. I spent a lot of time like kind of ruminating on time, and time is like one of the really big themes in my book, Dao of Bitcoin. And I think that some of these different ideas have kind of turned into shorter talks. And it's like, to back it up, the value of time, I make the argument in my book that money is a sense-making apparatus that we use to collectively understand reality. It's a comparative tool. It helps us determine relativity of value, and it also allows us to convert our own energy and time into other stuff that we need. So when we're working, we're earning money. What we're really doing is trading energy and time for then a medium that we can use to do something immediately with, like consume right away, or hopefully be able to really effectively store that energy and time for future consumption. Like, and so money that works really well, ideally, is something that provides certainty about the future. Like, if money is working well, then we have an understanding of what it's worth now, and we should know what it's worth in a year or 5 years, 10 years. Like hundreds of years ago, when money was working really well, the price of stuff like didn't change. The price of a bottle of Coke was like 5 cents between 1885 and 1959. So I think we just have never got to experience that. So, I think that, there's always this, like, you need to frame the reference of what Bitcoin's doing versus what regular fiat money is doing. And what fiat money is doing is forcing us into a thought paradigm where we just intuitively understand that money gradually becomes worth less. And if we extend that logic to say that we receive money as a result of some combination of our energy, consumed energy and time, then that means that the erosion of the value of money is actually eroding the value of the time and energy that we spent to get it. And it is also to say that it's diminishing our ability to store that time and energy so that we can convert it back and consume it at some point in the future. And so we're thinking about this all the time. And I think this is why, part of the way the world is right now, we are, everyone in their own way, sort of like searching for, you could call it like the holy grail of investing, which is to say the thing that will allow you to store your time and energy. And this is why everyone ran out and bought Airbnbs 6 years ago. And, like we're just chasing this thing, the thing that enables us. Because I think, like, for most people, not everybody wants to be like loaded. Financial freedom is, I think, for a lot of people, measured as having like true autonomy over your time. And that doesn't necessarily mean like yachts. It just might mean being able to be with your kids and not have to work a second job, or being able to take that trip that you want, like, with the person you want to do it with. So, in the fiat paradigm where that value is constantly being stolen from us, we have to think about the value of time in one way. And how we think about that is like, it's continually becoming less. I mean, how it plays out is things like our unwillingness to spend time on stuff, because time becomes scarce. When we can't store time, we're like hyper aware of how finite it is. And so this is why I think now, like, people will be scrolling Twitter while they're watching TV at the same time. It's like we're actually under such pressure to utilize the time that we do have, that the amount that we are willing to spend is becoming less and less. Like, it's hard for people to watch a whole movie now. And like, people will watch a TikTok, and if they don't like the first 3 seconds, they are scrolling to the next thing. Like, we're the bottomless pit of how worthless fiat can become is the same, I think, applies to the never-ending compression of the value of time in the fiat world. Because, and this is why none of us have any time. Like, and the world has reflected that. So, on the Bitcoin side, I think there's this really cool idea that Bitcoin's component parts, the inputs when you're creating Bitcoin, are actually time and energy. Like, Bitcoin is a clock of its own. It runs like a metronome. It's a machine that has blocks and difficulty adjustment periods and epochs, and this much larger cycle that will play out until 2140. And nothing can change the speed of that. Like, it's beating to its own pulse. And while those blocks are being made, energy is being consumed. So energy is being, you could think of it as energy is being poured into blocks as they're being minted. And the output is Bitcoin, is this thing that is a representation of what made it. So I think that, Bitcoin has this really fascinating connection to time, and how we can think about the value of time. And maybe just one final thought before I come up for air is like this idea that nothing can speed up a block, and some blocks take way longer than 10 minutes, right? So actually, in the Bitcoin world, the value of time is rigid. It's not measured in hours and seconds the way we think of conceptual time, but in terms of pricing time, the value of time. If we're using Bitcoin as the measurement, then the amount of world time that it takes can't be accelerated. There is no bottomless floor for how that process can unfold. And so that really creates the opportunity for entirely different experience. Like our individual experience of time is very subjective and personal. And when we're stressed or when we're young, we do throughout our lives experience the passing of time very differently. And I believe strongly that money and our understanding of money, our relationship with money, how money is working, impacts each of our own individual relationship with the perception of time.
Wow, that was awesome. So, please don't come up for air often. But I'm thinking about, you noted in one of your talks about like the movie Interstellar. And so maybe you could tell, what is it about the movie and maybe a particular scene that like you drew about like the notion of time and how it was processed there. I never saw the movie, but I.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing. Interstellar is one of my favorite movies. It's a movie made by Christopher Nolan, who I think is like maybe the last great blockbuster filmmaker.
Yeah, he's great.
But another funny quirk about Nolan is that he has a pattern of making movies that really are about time. Mm-hmm. Memento was about time.
Yeah.
Dunkirk was about time. Tenet was about time. Interstellar is about time. Interstellar is a space movie. Matthew McConaughey and a team of astronauts leave Earth in search of another planet that humanity can settle on to save, as like nobody can grow food on Earth anymore. And they go through a black hole. The first planet they find that's potentially suitable is a water planet. And when they land on the water planet, they are just kind of like orienting themselves, and they see in the horizon what they think is some kind of like mountain. And what it is like a 1,000-foot tall tidal wave. And they've never seen anything like it. They're scrambling to get back in the ship. They get back in the ship just in time. And this wave just almost totally destroys them. I think one of the astronauts dies in the first wave. And they kind of like, they're just collecting themselves, and they realize there's another one of those waves bearing down on them, and that this is just a phenomenon of what the ocean on this planet is like. And so what they thought from far away was that, oh, this is a water planet, it's mostly fine. And what they found is that it's like totally inhospitable. Like there's no way they can even survive. So this is another one of those things where it's the repeating motion of these waves that is creating these increments. And it got me thinking about Bitcoin blocks and Bitcoin halvings, because there's lots of like talk about the early effect of halvings on Bitcoin price and supply shocks. And, people are wondering now, what is, our cycle's gone? Is the halving really a meaningful event in terms of, and there's already so many Bitcoin mined that maybe the supply reduction in blocks isn't meaningful anymore. But I was watching that movie thinking about like, what does Bitcoin look like when most of the world has a much, much broader understanding of what it is? And, I think most people are really thinking about Bitcoin as though things 15 or 20 years from now will be mostly like they are today. And I personally don't believe that at all. Like, people kind of started using email, let's say in like, I don't know, 1993, 1994, and give or take, right?
Yeah.
So Bitcoin's 15 years old. So if we were making the same comparison, that would be like 2008, 2009 in the email world, right? Like we're really just getting started here. And people, I think, will look back at what's going on right now, corporate treasuries, Texas State Reserve, and, be surprised at how early that was. I think like, give it another 20 years and this thing is a Kardashev technology. This is the first planetary invention we have that, builds on top of internet technology to create a machine. To me, Bitcoin is a monetary technology and combined with an energy technology. And this thing where Bitcoin has a component input of energy means that every energy source that could potentially be harvested over a long enough period of time has an economic decision to be made about whether or not the energy coming out of source X should be used for mining Bitcoin or doing something else. Like that plays out until every economic actor has made that decision about every windmill, every gas well, every trickling stream. So that means that all of the energy that's potentially available to us could be measured using the Bitcoin network, which means that we're looking at something, and I don't know how long that's going to take, but while that process is unfolding and maturing, Bitcoins are becoming more and more rare. And, by 2034, there will be almost no Bitcoins being introduced into the system. So, like, if the world ran on gold and we knew, everyone in the planet knew that the supply of gold that was being mined would reduce by 50% every 4 years, at what point would people really catch on and have to start pre-planning for the effects of the tidal waves? And so that's kind of this thing where like 4 years really isn't that much. These are presidential cycles, right? And so, you've just had time to catch air and orient yourself around how the world operates under one condition. And you might be getting to like, you're halfway done or you're a year away from it changing again. And I feel like this is where we're going with global markets really starting to understand what absolute scarcity means. So it's like a giant python. And if there is still some kind of like fiat system that it happens in 2045, like it will just be wrenching tighter and tighter and tighter. And, the tighter it goes, the more incented everyone who's not participating is to join the party. So at that point, it becomes like it's a flywheel. And this is why I think like, I maybe talked about this on my show, but the notion to me that we're still going to be talking about the Bitcoin price in dollars at the terminal of some of the strategy models to me is unlikely. Because if we are, I just can't see dollars being an enduring tool in that system.
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating to watch because, I could see a world where just so much is still a unit of count in dollars for not smart economic reasons, and that underlying things are settled and priced in Bitcoin, at least in terms of mainstream for another 20 or 30 years rather than maybe 10 or 15 or 20, because just I do think there's a chance here for digital dominance with stable coins for a little longer than I'm originally perceiving. But I love the idea you brought up about like power source X and just mining Bitcoin or not. And we just covered this on Bitcoin Center where France just had a proposal where, with nuclear power, you can't really turn it on or off. So they power a lot of their, country with nuclear, and they have a lot of overcapacity when the system doesn't need that full capacity it's built for, but they can't turn that off. And the proposal is actually to just mine Bitcoin with it. And it's interesting to see a country like France come around, not even come around in the sense that they passed the proposal, but to look at things like this. And I think the real global hash wars are when all the countries point their nuclear energy at Bitcoin and hopefully not each other. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if they blow up each other's, mining power as a form of warfare. But I want to stay on Interstellar for a second. You got to explain to me the meme or the scene with Matthew McConaughey and he's crying or something, and what's going on there?
Yeah, so one of the aspects of the discussion of time in that movie is that gravity affects the passage of time. So the closer you are to a black hole, time slows down relative to people who are farther away from it. And so they have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to visit this water planet because they know the gravity is way stronger because it's really close to this black hole. And they make a calculation about how much stronger they think it is. And they're only down there for a few hours. And they get back to their ship. And part of the mistake is that because they didn't understand the water was the way it was, the ship is damaged slightly and they can't take off right away. And they lose all this time on the surface. And it's like every minute down there is like 7 hours on Earth. So when they get back to the ship, 20 years has passed and he's plugging into these like video vlogs from his kids and watching their entire lives play out. He's missed their entire lives. And it's like this really powerhouse, like emotional scene. I actually just saw a clip the other day that said that was a scene that McConaughey only recorded once. And so he hadn't actually seen the clips of the actors playing his kids. He didn't know exactly what was coming. And he just watched it one time and they just cut it. And he nailed it. It was like a really moving moment.
Yeah. So they have, you notice there's a lot of expressions about sort of time. It's like running out of time. That's a waste of time. Time flies. When is like the earliest recording of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Earlier tools for recording time, sundials, hourglasses, we wouldn't have thought about time in the same way. I might not exactly answer this, but I'm going to kind of answer this. So I think even that is a really interesting thing to think about. If you imagine a world that predated, where people were timekeeping using tools that were like related to the natural world, we would have really only have known based on, like, we want to be somewhere based on like where the sun was at a certain point, right? And so we wouldn't have had the ability to really conceptualize all these automated things that we do now that relate to like stopwatches. And I found I'm working on a second edition for my book, and part of what's going to be different is a much sort of deeper dive into a lot of these time concepts. I was reading an essay that was written in 1944 by an economist named George Woodcock called The Tyranny of the Clock. And in this essay, he puts forward the idea that the most significant advancement, which enabled the modern era, which was first sort of predated by the Industrial Revolution, was actually the invention of the mechanical clock. Because the advent of the mechanical clock was the beginning of exact time. It was the first moment in human history where we were then able to measure and met out time as though it was a commodity, like it was something that we could trade. And we started trading exact time. And so his argument in this essay is that the mechanical clock enabled time to actually become the most important commodity fueling the Industrial Revolution, because this then created things like assembly line manufacturing and locomotives, like trains running on time. Like all of these things could now be expected to work like clockwork. Yeah, it's a really interesting idea that ties back to this thing we were talking about earlier about the individual perception of time. Like this measurement of seconds and hours is another made up thing. It's as made up as fiat, right? It's just a pretend thing that we've determined. It helps us make sense of the world. And so then, and I was thinking about like that. So that on its own is a really important advancement that allowed a lot of things. And like central banking on its own is a really important advancement that allowed for some really great things. And it's like the fusion of these two things together, where now we're able to commoditize time, but we're going to measure it with a form of money that is programmed to become less valuable. Which means now that the system itself is programmed to devalue the thing that is really the most important thing to all of us. Like the one thing that is absolutely finite and none of us actually know exactly how much of it we have. And so when did we record time? It's an interesting question. I think like, when did we start having such a weird relationship with time? Might be another thing worth pondering.
Yeah, it's part of that weird relationship, like thinking about past, present, and future.
Yeah.
And not just sort of being in the moment.
Yeah. This is a consciousness model where like the ideal state is you spend like 95% of your time in the present moment and 2.5% of your time thinking about the past and the future. And I think that, time moves faster when you're spending a lot of your time like thinking about the past, regretting over the past, or like having anxiety about the future. And where we experience our greatest degree of enjoyment is when we're just totally present and living in the now. And I think that's also always been true, and like that was probably more true before the mechanical clock existed, and we didn't have some of these conceptions, like these notions about, trading time, storing time. Yeah, it's an interesting like thing to think about.
Why does nobody have time?
Yeah.
Like, it's very hard to come across someone who's like, yeah, I have time. I just have time for that. I have time for this. I have time for everything I want to do. Or
Yeah, and I think like imagine for a second the cascading series of societal problems that result from us not being able to feel like we can store time, right? All of these distracted, and obviously like everyone has what happened since 1971 and the divorce rates have quintupled and all of these things. Is like we have actually erected an entire society on the premise that like nobody has time, and we don't have any time because we can't effectively store it. I think that like, because one of these things that Bitcoin really does, if you've rocked it, like in the book I say, the Dao of Bitcoin is a sense of tranquility that accompanies the comprehension of energy money. And the reason for that is if you've really understood what it's doing for you, then you are able to spend more of your conscious moments and living in the present now, because you found that holy grail. So you're not having to constantly angst about planning for the future or finding that thing that's going to help you escape the rat race and just have autonomy over your time. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's another one of my favorite movies is a movie called Arrival. Have you seen Arrival? Amy Adams. It's a movie about aliens land on Earth, and a team of scientists is selected to interact with these people, these aliens, and try to understand why they're here. And this woman is going into their ship and meeting with the aliens. They don't speak English. They have a different language. It's visual. And they're studying this language and like gradually starting to, figure out individual words or concepts. And the twist, the spoiler, the movie's old, so I'm going to spoil it. But the twist is that the technology that the aliens are there to share is their language itself, because their language actually exists outside of linear time. And the moment that she understands the technology, she actually has the ability to transcend time and, talk to people in the past and the future. And so I also think there's this other really cool thing to think about with Bitcoin and time, which I do talk a little bit about in the book. Come to me from Mike Dunworth, who sent a Bitcoin to 2140 and locked it there. And because there's also this thing about Bitcoin being something that moves in a linear motion forward through time, and can, we can pinpoint it to block heights. Like we couldn't know exactly when that's going to happen. But if we were to do that, we could send really information into the future that would be waiting for us when we arrive there. And like if time actually is not linear, like there's a lot of, sort of quantum theory that a linear experience of time is just something that happens for us because of like our physical bodies and how we have a forward journey, 3-dimensional forward journey. So if that's not actually how things work, and this is what this happens in Interstellar. So at the end of Interstellar, he enters the black hole and experiences himself experiencing his own life in 4 dimensions, where the 4th dimension is time. And in that 4th dimensional view, everything is happening at once. So he's viewing all of these different moments from his life simultaneously. And he's actually interacting with himself, different moments throughout his entire life at once. So yeah, so if we sent Bitcoin in the future, we can't actually in 3 dimensions experience that our future selves may already have that Bitcoin now. And which is kind of what happens in Arrival. The idea that like that may actually be happening right now, and we just don't have the ability to experience it.
Yeah, for sure. Thinking more about the free time. I mean, how do you measure an average person's like amount of free time?
I mean, I think it's probably like free time is time that you would be willing to spend thoughtlessly. I don't know. I this is kind of one of these. Another interesting thing about free time, this not having enough time, is the same way that in the fiat world, this compression of the value of time makes us always feel like time is scarce. We never can have enough when it's continually being devalued. And the opposite is totally true for Bitcoiners, right? So when you understand that it's not just your money that's appreciating, it's really appreciating your time. So if you, instead of earning $100 for an hour, you earned, 0.001 Bitcoin, that time appreciates. Like everyone's talking about, Odell Beckham earned whatever, and it's Bitcoin, and now it's worth whatever, much more. But like really the time that he spent earning that money has appreciated too. So earning your money in Bitcoin is a way that actually makes your time spent more valuable over time, which then causes like the reverse calculus of the fiat world. And I think that Bitcoiners actually do this. You see people who completely change their spending habits and what interests them. So like, in the Bitcoin world, it's more like, would I spend 22 minutes watching the show on Netflix or go climb that mountain that's going to take me 4 hours, but be 10,000 times more enjoyable? And like, this is what people who've aligned themselves to Bitcoin's clock actually do, right? Because they do have more time in the literal sense, and they value time differently. Like, so this kind of like concept of the individual and subjective experience of time, it just actually does manifest itself in a very literal way right now. Like I'm living my life completely differently than I was 5 years ago when the hamster wheel I was on too was continually getting harder and harder to spin. And like I think this is the crazy thing about money, and it's the matrix, right? Where we're just born into it. And so we don't actually think it, and you can't really run both operating systems simultaneously. So, and this is just still true for a lot of people who are like actively following Bitcoin and super into Bitcoin, and they're still measuring everything in dollars. So they're probably not experiencing any of this other stuff. And some of them might be listening to this thinking I'm a complete moron, which is totally fine. But
it's amazing. A lot of people use the example around housing, around how Bitcoin or fiat depreciates your time in terms of, your house goes up in fiat terms and it goes down a lot in Bitcoin terms. But you could look at it really with salaries, where, someone who's, worked 20 years as maybe a public school teacher in the 80s and made 50 grand a year. And now someone with like 2 years experience, makes like 100 grand a year. And they're not, delivering twice the amount of value of a teacher with 20 years experience. And that teacher's time was really devalued or whatever they saved from it. Can you like maybe elaborate on the structural problem that we're all having as a global society or really social consensus around representing, trying to represent time and energy around the world with 180 plus different forms of paper currencies?
yeah, this was an idea that I was talking about in Montreal and a little bit in Sydney too. Like we've used lots of different forms of money over, the history of civilization. And, one thing I was noting was like, it's interesting to me that the lifespan of those different forms of non-paper money seem to have some kind of a relationship with like the physical substance they actually are. So the most enduring form of money we've ever had is gold, which is basically an immortal metal. And the other options like beads and stones and things that are just less durable than gold, and then went on to prove to be less durable money. And I wonder about the connection between those two things. It's interesting to me, and I think that money it's a representation of reality. It's a representation of time and energy. And like gold is a representation of time and energy. It takes energy to dig it out of the ground, and it takes a lot of time to dig it out of the ground. It's just not exact time. So we don't know how long it's going to take you to dig, which is another reason why Bitcoin represents an improvement on really bonding this relationship between value, energy, and time. Paper is basically the worst representation of energy and time because as a physical substance, it actually decays, right? Like this is a non-durable. I mean, I realize it's plastic now, so it probably lasts a little bit longer, but so I think that one thing on its own is a problem because it does seem like over human history, there has been some subliminal understanding of the innate value of something that we're being forced to use, regardless of what it is. And the paper system is even like takes the absurdity to ratchet it up another notch by then allowing every political jurisdiction to create their own form of paper. So not only so this thing is literally just a pretend representation of reality, and all of the different jurisdictions are free to make as much of it as they want. They're all doing it at different rates. And so then we're forced to figure out how these pieces of paper relate to each other. And so we do all, as a result, have like a super different conception of money, of what it is, of how it works, why you would want it. And it's really a critical element of how we think about organizing ourselves. It shapes our motivations and our, like how safe we are. This is a fundamental foundational thing. And so the fact that we haven't been able to solve it's a technology, right? Like money is an invention that was created to solve the coincidence of wants so that we could move beyond bartering and start to have large, complex economies. So why did we stop? Like we got to, paper, I think was at a moment, it was an innovation because it was a paper representation of gold and it solved a problem. It was like a scaling solution. It was like a layer 2 for gold, right? And there was a relationship for a time between paper and gold. And so the paper made sense, or it made more sense. And then when that ended and none of us were really alive for that or in a meaningful way as adults, and it just kind of stopped. And now we're at like the end point of this thing playing it out to like total insanity. And I think that I'm a big fan of Peruvian Bull and his like dollar milkshake ideas. This notion that the paper currencies will all collapse into the dollar, which will then ultimately do what all fiat currencies do. But I mean, like outside of the Western paper currencies, the average lifespan of a fiat currency is 22 years. And like in Venezuela, the month over month inflation is 13%. So, just even think about that, right? Like inflation in Canada is insane. Like a steak is $100, whatever, but like the money still mostly works. And so someone living in Venezuela is having a hard time, like just procuring like basic things to live, is really experiencing probably a very different experience of time and of money. So yeah, I mean, this is where I think like Bitcoin also, it's almost like providing the planet with a uniform language. Like, so we're moving to a place where as a species, we can all speak the same language of value, which means that we can all start to think about a uniform experience of time and value, which will transcend borders, right? Like this is something that potentially dissolves borders, because I think that a lot of the reason for the traditional borders in like peaceful places is capital control.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. It's definitely not just pure property rights, which it should be. But What does a society's ability to like buy a house say about it?
Yeah, this is a tender one for me because like I live in Canada, and how the broken money has manifested itself here is the monetization of housing. So like, you go to Detroit or Buffalo, and you can go like 40 minutes across the border to Windsor, and the same house, the exact same house, is 3 or 4 times the price in Canada. And our money's worth a little bit less, but not to that degree. And so it's something that kind of happened here where we just monetized houses, and it was because we didn't have a way to protect energy and time, and everyone is searching for that holy grail. Housing is one of these things, right? It is like the base layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think that when people don't have access to like somewhere to live, is where things start to get really dicey for societies. And I don't think, like, at the same time, I really don't think houses should be investments at all. And this is, I think, something that's also very different. Like in the US, I get the sense that, people don't buy a house with it sort of being their primary financial battery and their main, like, they're also their main investment. And that is really true in Canada and in Australia and in some of these like one tier down dollar milkshake currencies. The house has just become something a little bit more of a Frankenstein asset. And then you go further down and like there's no ownership. And so I think it's a problem. I think that Bitcoin will absolutely demonetize residential real estate as an asset class. And for that reason, I sold my house when I really understood Bitcoin. And it's, I think if you're not planning to make money and you just enjoy the sense of sort of peace of mind of owning your home as an asset, I think that's great. But for people who I think are imagining that real estate will appreciate in fiat terms over the next 30 years, the way they did over the last 30 years, I can't see how that can happen in a world where you have an alternative that goes up at 40% a year and doesn't require tenants and new kitchens and isn't subject to who the mayor is or what the crime rate is in your area, the interest rates. Like it's just Bitcoin's like, as part of solving this problem globally, there's going to be a massive reordering of people's behaviors. And I think that one of the casualties is going to be people who are speculating on residential real estate as an investment.
Yeah, I think that definitely happens in America. Maybe it's not as prevalent, but I think Americans definitely see their house as it drives me crazy too, as someone with a finance and accounting and economics background. Your primary residence is not a house, and I would like to see the housing market. And it's consumption, and a lot of people, when they look at the economics of making money on a house, they don't factor in the taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the repairs, the maintenance, and things of that nature. And they do very simple math to get to, and so and then even with the house, as the value of your home's appreciating, if you're not extracting that value by selling it when it's not a very liquid market, and then you got to go replace it, and if you can't replace it at a cheaper cost, you haven't actually made money there. But along the way, then the cost of homeowners insurance, your property taxes, your repairs and maintenance all go up because the money's getting devalued and your home price went up. Anyway, your home's not worth more, your dollars are worth less. But I think when you get into your other properties, maybe you can call those investments and things like that. Maybe you can get lucky on the house, or not lucky, maybe pick well, but what about architecture over time? How is architecture a smoking gun of how we conceptualize time?
Yeah, I love this one. It's a real like pet of mine. I took a lot of art history classes at university and I've traveled a lot, and like always on my travels, I just love to walk around cities and see the beautiful old buildings. Could be anywhere in the world, right? They're everywhere. And it's just true to say, like, we really don't build things with the the beauty that we used to, like, 150 years ago, 250 years ago, and even older. These, you go to like Washington, D.C., Paris, whatever, people aren't going to go see like the glass boxes we're building now. They're going to see like the beautiful granite and limestone and columns and domes. Like, it's a style that everyone has seen and is like just really, incredible, pleasing the eye, right? And I think part of it is like it's the same thing about, putting the system side by side. So in the fiat world today, I would argue that a big part of the reason why we don't build stuff that looks like that right now, one is it would be impossible to make money. Two, because the construction timelines would be longer. It's, as money's melting, it's harder to estimate like input costs of goods. Like the price of lumber went up like 800% between 2009 and 2020. So imagine like trying to build a 20-year building during that time, like you get absolutely murdered in the way our economy works now. And so for all of these reasons, these factors kind of coalesce in our collective understanding of the world. And this is how we go about and create a society together. So what we're doing instead in the world of building things is the same thing we're doing in the world of how we like consume media and everything else. Is like we're juicing as much pulp out of the orange and spending less and less time on these things. It's about completing them quickly, turning them for a profit, using crappy materials. It's like everything is disposable. And we live in this like disposable world now. And it's this time thing. And I think that, the thing about architecture is, because you can go and view the buildings yourself, like they're real physical things that exist, and you can examine them. And it's plain as day that something has changed. And what has changed is the thing that exists inside the imagination of the architects and the will of the financiers. And, it's like our architecture is a physical representation of how we're imagining the world we want to live in together. So it's like we are all actually coexisting in a real version of Minecraft. Like we actually get to build stuff and decide how this thing looks, and we're all kind of like trying to do cool things, and we have constraints and considerations that have evolved and changed, or I should say devolved. And so I think that as we transition to a world where it's possible to think about time appreciating, we're going to start to see people imagining structures that appreciate too. Like we should return to a place where we want to build something that 1,000 years from now, tourists would be like, holy cow, like that thing was built in 2035. And, and that's, I don't think it is true right now. And so, so for me, everything that we do is a monument for the future. And what we're doing right now is like producing disposable stuff. And that's our legacy. It's a time capsule of a society that exists where our common understanding of time is that if you don't do something immediately, it's going to be harder tomorrow.
Due to, I guess, our inability to save time, are we co-creating a dystopia?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the book. I was this idea that I saw in a Grantland article in 2013. I think it was maybe a little bit earlier, that science fiction shifted over the course of, in the 50s, the 1920s. There was this period where science fiction was really utopian. And when Walt Disney made Tomorrowland, it was a vision of like 1986. And the vision he thought of was like the Jetsons, right? It was like flying cars and like abundance, and every problem had been solved. And then in the 70s, things started to change. And by the time the 80s actually arrived, we had like Terminator and Back to the Future 2 and Akira and, all Blade Runner, all of these super dystopian films, which is a reflection of like, I think science fiction is just another window into like how we're thinking about, our imagination, collective imagination. And then it's like, so what happened in between 1950 and 1980? Well, we already talked about that. It's an interesting coincidence, right? But it's maybe just some measurement of another like subconscious understanding that, maybe we were headed to a period where things were going to get harder instead of easier, because, actually money was probably working a lot better, especially in the US, right? At 1944, Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe, like the economy's booming. It's like, now I lost my place.
Well, I'll jump in and maybe I'll come back to you. But I think, the one wrinkle I see with the architecture, and it's a little bit of my conspiracy theory I have, is like you go into like corporate buildings and it's completely soulless. And I don't think that's by accident. I mean, it's just every corporation has the same rug, or it's like there's this terrible part of every department where there's like, here are the ugly corporate rugs, and they're all cut and designed to be replaced, but no one ever does, no matter how many stains there are. And then like everything about it is soulless. But then the only buildings that aren't soulless are the government buildings, which are grand and beautiful. And we're even going through this controversy now with like the Federal Reserve spending $2.5 billion to build and I think it's really, kind of the government is really imprinting or stamping the phenomenon of government is still all powerful, and the corporations are, minimizing the people that work there on purpose, almost through the architecture.
Yeah.
Part of it through, quote unquote savings. But, I can't help it to have that impressed on me. What about, is the breaking of money a natural phenomenon?
And I think this is the thing, right? Where we get these really absurd media reporting around inflation as though, like I would say the average person who's never really looked at money or thought about Bitcoin thinks that inflation is some sort of important lubricant for how economies work. And that it's a necessary thing that we, it's 2%. And it's kind of like a Agent Smith response. Everybody knows that's the target. It's an invention. We made up money. And the scenario we operate in now is one where a small handful of people get to determine how money is created and issued. And so it's absolutely unnatural. Like at least when we were using precious metals as money, we were bound by the time and energy required to physically produce those things, which produced a limitation on how money could be expanded and diluted and created. And this is another one of these things that fiat money has really broken to the advantage of the creators, to say that they can create an unlimited, there's no relationship between energy and time in the creation of fiat money. And so this is, I think, something that almost like this idea of Bitcoin's clock potentially allows us to maybe return to a more natural relationship with time by Bitcoin is really imposing a rigidity on the variable and diminishing value of time. Because it exists outside of that system and it cannot be manipulated. So, we talk a lot about this concept like Bitcoin is truth, and Bitcoin is something that will, it's like the metric system of value. It's something that is a sensible way to think about the comparative value of things. But I think the same can be said for time, because Bitcoin has this almost like, rigid relationship between the amount of time it takes to create a block, and we know how much energy is required to do it. And because of how much information is available about that, and the fact that it's planetary, it's something that is, it will force everything else to adapt to it. And this is that idea that we were talking about very earlier about the effect of halvings becoming like a python on the paper system. Bitcoin is like a giant metronome. It will just click click, click, right? And as a result of doing that, like, we're going to be powerless to avoid synchronizing to that thing. And that was where the Montreal presentation was called Bitcoin is synchronizing human consciousness. And I think that there's sort of two really interesting parallel phenomenon to be considered with that idea, what I was talking about there. One is this very literal thing that I'm talking about, where the economics of Bitcoin being able to be predicted in a way that is public information, such that we will all start to conform to events in Bitcoin's time, whether we want to or not. And then I think as a secondary effect, it's very possible that as a result of a growing number of people starting to think about Bitcoin and think about Bitcoin ideas and measure their time and energy in Bitcoin, you and I are synchronizing our consciousnesses right now. Like, that process is already underway. So when we have 180 forms of money and all of these different local and regional experiences of time and energy, there is no potential or opportunity for a coherent and uniform way of thinking. Tick, tick, tick. So the more people, it's like, people staring at a bright light, right? And the more people that stare at it, the greater the power of focus becomes. And if Bitcoin matures to a place where the economics of Bitcoin do become that sort of like metaphorical tidal wave, the intellectual force of that thing, I think, is going to cause a global reordering of how we think about all these things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to dig into the time thing. Before we do, why is there an all-seeing eye on the pyramid on the dollar bill?
Yeah. I think that's, we've talked about this. So part of however this thing works is that certain breadcrumbs on the trail are meant to be obvious if you're willing to kind of look right at them. And I can't think of one that is more, it's almost like a joke that we all have been staring at this thing and using it daily. It's like looking at us right in the face. And in spite of that, a lot of people still think that that this pretend piece of paper that we use because we're told to, and it steals from us. And a lot of us understand that it steals from us. And we think that it's a natural phenomenon. And this is something that is an accidental thing that no one can control or benefit from. And it's like the greatest magic trick that's ever been executed, because it's been done at such a scale and for so long. It's almost hard to believe. Like, I think that people, in 2140, people will be looking at this with the picture of the pyramid on a dollar bill, and it'll be like, I hope they're laughing. Honestly, I hope they're laughing.
We'll see if something that it'll be like the either like the monetary museum, or it'll be like sort of like in one of those like the wacky and wild history of fiat currency. Depending on the name of the museum, we'll know the vibe in there. But what is entropy?
Yeah, so entropy is a term that applies to physics, right? The laws of thermodynamics. And it refers to, in thermodynamics, entropy refers to energy in a closed system that is sort of not being expended in its intended purpose. So if you think about like a light bulb, when you pass an electrical current through a light bulb, the intended purpose is creating light. And then there's always some heat that it's not 100% efficient. So some of that electricity that's meant to be transformed into light energy is transformed into heat energy and lost. And so that's entropy in thermodynamics. And in information systems theory, entropy is described as a measure of disorder. So the degree of entropy is understood by the amount of description that's required to describe a system state. So the more complex a description is required, like the more disarray is present. So I think that, I talked about this concept in Australia. I think we need different words to describe what's happening with Bitcoin and with fiat. And part of the issue is because it's money. We really want to talk about money and, monetary terms, economics, and, or, sort of more like grandiose metaphors that might make sense for us. Where I think that there's, entropy is an appropriate way to describe what is happening both in fiat and in Bitcoin, because one, from that thermodynamic kind of standpoint, inflation is something that could be thought of as lost energy. When new money is created, it doesn't create any more value. It dilutes the value of the money that existed before. That energy is transferred to the new money. And in the case of the money that you earned, it's your energy. Like, that energy doesn't come from nowhere, right? And so it's not like a victimless crime. And if we think about the concept of information theory, I think like it's a very apt term, because our financial system has become so insanely complex that all these different behaviors that exist today are a result of us trying to find that holy grail and solve this financial problem. So there is an immense amount of disarray and disorder, and then all of these weird industries and businesses and services that really shouldn't exist, but exist because they make sense in a fiat world where things continually need to be made more cheaply and disposably and consumably. And instead of like us building one building for 30 years that would last for 1,000, we want to build 500 buildings in 2 years that will last for 30 years so that we can replace them and do it again. Right. And none of that makes sense. Like, none of that, what I just described there, makes any sense at all. But this is a system we're operating in, a senseless system. And so, it's this argument that Bitcoin is a monetary technology that is free of entropy. And I think that, you could make the argument in a literal sense, because, there's going to be maybe not totally literally, because I understand that when you fire up a computer, there is also some heat loss. Not all of the electrical energy goes into mining the Bitcoins. But this notion is that energy and time are consumed, and then they're like minted into a block that is more immortal than a bar of gold. So the output of that thing, because it's permanent, right? It's like, it's eternal. So this is a money system where the entropy problem has been solved, and it has also solved the information problem. Like, Bitcoin is kind of a weird idea because it works counterintuitively to the way we've been educated about money, but it is a much more sensible way to think about money, right? It makes complete sense that everyone knows exactly how much of it there is, and then we can decide how much everything else is worth, and everything else can orient itself around the one thing that everyone knows how much of it there is. So that's actually the simplest possible monetary concept we could ever conceive of. And so I think that we've put up with entropy. So this is the other thing, like, entropy is a breaking down, right? And our money breaks down. Like, it's another law in thermodynamics that when entropy is present in a system, its nature is that it will progressively increase. So the hotter a light bulb gets, the hotter it gets, and the more heat is lost. And so this is also very true, with the life cycle of fiat money. And I think that what we're seeing right now in society is really this like peak entropy. It's, like homelessness crisis in every major city. It's, uh, I mean, all of these things are peak entropy. The world realized through the lens of society struggling with monetary entropy.
Right. And so what does that do for the relationship, or Bitcoin for the relationship between time, value, and energy?
I think if we're thinking about a world where there's enough people that understand that this monetary technology is also an energy technology, and it's a monetary energy technology that is bound with time. So in the book, I talk about this concept of thinking of the three as kind of a triunity, where those three things, time, energy, and value, are the points on an equilateral triangle. And those, time, value, and energy should be bonded by time. Like we should know, there should be some kind of a relationship between how much something's worth and how long it took something to do, and or how much energy was consumed and how much time it took. Right? These things should be sort of fixed, and this is the basis for a sensible way of making value measurements. So I think that what Bitcoin does, as it's imposing this rigidity on the relationship between value and energy, it's doing that because the time piece is fixed, right? It's blocks and difficulty adjustments and epochs. And only so many transactions can go into a block. And what can change is the amount of energy that's going in and the amount of value that's being measured, right? So because there's a constant in the middle there, it forces a fixed relationship between the other two things. And in mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem is like, if you know the information about two sides of a triangle, you can always figure out the third, right? And so that was kind of like, how I started thinking about this. I really think that time and all of these different aspects of time is just such a fascinating rabbit hole of Bitcoin. And like, these aren't my ideas. Like Gigi was talking about time, Bitcoin and time, like years ago. And yeah, there's just some really fascinating discussion about it. But at the end of the day, it's all this thing about how we understand how we spend our own time. And like when we plan for the future, those are like monetary calculations too, right? You're going to plan for your retirement, you're going to plan for a holiday, you're going to plan to send your kids to college. Like, these are financial calculations. You're measuring the value of the input of time you're going to have to spend to do those things. And you're doing it in a way that has a baked in assumption that along the way, the consumed time is going to be worth less and less. So that's because in the current system, there is no fixed point of anything, right? Like the never ending paper means that the other two things, it's impossible to properly fix the relationship between the other two things.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads us to that energy plus time equals Bitcoin. But how does Bitcoin move through time and space without friction?
Yeah, I mean, so durable across space and time is one of my favorite. I think I originally saw that idea from Jack Mahler's. I might be crediting that incorrectly. Bitcoin is durable across time because it's non-physical. And the assumption, so that in the literal sense, there's nothing to protect or degrade. It's information, which is the most durable thing. And so Bitcoin has solved that problem that we were talking about earlier of physically degrading forms of money, stones and seashells and paper. And so, and I think figuratively, Bitcoin is durable across time because as the network endures, you know, you can move Bitcoin forward in the future. So it's money that because of its lack of entropy, it's money that has been engineered to have value in the future. And that means that as a financial tool, you can send value into the future to yourself by buying Bitcoin today and doing nothing, which is something you can't do with paper money, right?
Oh.
And you can actually literally send a Bitcoin to yourself in the future if you want to. You know, you could do that too. If you don't trust yourself to save it along the way, just send it 10 years into the future and hope you don't die. And it'll arrive there, and you can meet it and have and spend it then. So I think Bitcoin is durable across time in a few different really interesting ways, and across space. Again, like, you know, physical forms of money. Part of the reason for that scaling solution of paper and gold was the difficulty of transporting gold across space. And I think in a much more like a much bigger way of thinking about this is that Bitcoin is actually entirely dematerializing our ability to move value across space. So it is 100% true that you can send billions and billions and billions of dollars anywhere in the world in, you know, near in seconds for pennies, depending on the day on the Bitcoin network. And what that means is there isn't a lot of reason to think about sending anything physical across distance anymore. Like, you know, it's more than, you know, demonetizing other monetary things you might want to move physically. It's actually obsoleted the entire thing. So Bitcoin is the most durable thing across space because you don't actually have to physically move anything. So it's also like transcended the limitations of physical stores of value.
Wow, that's something to noodle on. How do people who are underground in caves for a long time experience or interpret time?
Yeah, this is a crazy one. This like French, and I can't remember his name right now. There's a French scientist who was experimenting with this and going underground for long periods of time. So no natural light, no devices that would let him have any idea of like what time of day it was or how many hours had passed. He's going down there for weeks. And after a very short period of time, he was like days and days off. So he was sleeping a lot less, noticing time passing, like he's experiencing months in the periods of weeks. And came out, emerged from this cave, and was shocked to find out how much less time in the real world had actually passed. And so this is another one of those things, I guess, going back to the mechanical clock. It's like when we created the mechanical clock, we abdicated our natural ability to try and determine how time should pass on our own. And we just submitted to an external measurement and a conception of, we were just told what it was. So now it's like we can't even help it, but we do think about like, I have to be somewhere in an hour. And we kind of know what we think how long an hour is, right? It's like, but what that guy actually proved is that we really don't, because when you take away all of the external stimuluses that help us, calibrate to that, we operate under a completely different perception of it.
That's amazing. What about like the notion that you were talking about how like Bitcoin is time and it's got its own sort of measurement of time. So is Bitcoin the end of time as we know it? Or is it just the end of time?
There's like Francis Fukuyama's end of time.
Yeah.
It's like, I think, some idea that's been maybe in my mind for a while. And I don't think that we're talking about the end of time as far as like the end of humanity. I think we're moving into a place where we're moving towards the end of time as we conceptualize it right now. So one of the things, we were talking about this earlier, this idea that most people probably imagine that the medium term future being mostly like how the world is right now. And this applies to a lot of things, right? Like we assume that, Canada, the country, has like borders haven't really changed in 150 years. So we mostly assume that borders probably won't change. And, all things will look mostly the same. And I think that, so time could be another one of these things where, the mechanical clock has been the metronome that we've all been setting ourselves to for the last 400 years. And so the assumption is that that's what we'll do forever. But it could be the case that the fusion of time and energy and value frees us from the commoditization of time and liberates us then as a result from having to really think about exact time in that way. So we would still like need to know what time it is, but we wouldn't be having it govern our lives to the same extent. And we wouldn't be experiencing this perceptual scarcity of time in the same way. So that, like the guy in the cave, we might just actually be able to experience something different in our lives. This idea that nobody has time might be the thing that ends, and it'd be replaced by just a different kind of life. And it could be this way with like, if Elon's right and robots are doing all the labor in a few years and they don't murder us all, like we're living in some kind of utopia where, now we need to figure out what to do with ourselves. Maybe that's the thing. And who knows?
Talking about time is so interesting with you. How is time a wealth multiplier?
Yeah. So I think like time is actually the thing that people want. Like, some people want money. So, but I think most people actually, if they could articulate it properly, want time. So time's a wealth multiplier in two ways. In the literal sense, the more of it you have, like, it's like, these are sort of fundamental rules of investing. Like the time value of money, the earlier you start investing, the more opportunity you have to grow your wealth. I think, but more like, esoterically, I guess it's like the more time you have, truly, the wealthier you are. So that could mean free time. It could mean how much time you have in front of you. Like wealthiest people who die suddenly and die young, all the money they have doesn't really matter, right? It's like, so I think that when we're coming back to this idea with buildings, right? Time is the piece in the equation that enables us to think about building the building that's going to last for 1,000 years and take 30 years to build. So the multiplier in that example is stored time enables us to produce something of much more value.
Yeah, totally. What do you think happens to the human mind after we don't have to spend all our waking hours worrying about money, our money turning into dust?
I really wonder about that. It's like, I think that a lot of the distractedness, the consumable behavior that we do now are coping mechanisms to manage our dopamine systems in the sort of like state of perpetual anxiety that results as a byproduct of how money works. So, I mean, even money itself is an abstract thing that we invented and then kind of became perverted, right? But people, if we could organize ourselves in small enough groups that we didn't need it, we wouldn't. Like it's not a mandatory thing. Not only is melting money not natural, like it would be possible for us to exist without money. Maybe it would be different, or like it would be hard for us to be in cities of 10 million. But yeah, so That's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for it.
What is the 100 monkeys theory?
There was a study conducted in Japan in the 50s of monkeys that were a group of monkeys were taught to wash a sweet potato because the clean potatoes tasted better. And what the scientists were actually studying was the monkey's ability to teach other monkeys the skill. So that was the purpose of what they were doing. It became a study around collective consciousness, because what happened was after a certain number of monkeys had been taught the skill, monkeys on other parts of the island that had no interaction with the monkeys, the potato monkeys, started exhibiting the behavior. And it's a wild thing to think about what is the phenomenon that would have caused that to happen. And so, I think that this, we make a mistake, and this is like Plato's cave. I think was it you and I were talking about Plato's cave in our last conversation?
I think so. But
Yeah. I mean, part of Plato's cave is that we have been convinced that we are spectators, like we're receivers only. So like our eyes only take information in, and we hear things and it comes in, and it's like a one way, it's in. And I think the reality is, probably in my opinion, it's more the case that we are all more like two-way transmitters, two-way radios. So we're broadcasting and receiving simultaneously, all of us, all kinds of nonverbal information. It's like we're picking up so many different signals at all times, and some of it may just actually be, telepath, whatever you want to call it. It's a collective consciousness. And so I think this is a phenomenon that is this is what the monkeys exhibited, and I think this is what happens in people, and it's part of what I think, in the Synchronizing Human Consciousness presentation. This is what I think will happen is, at a certain point, enough people are going to understand Bitcoin that it won't matter, and like not everyone is going to need to, and all of a sudden enough people will that it's like it's a moment of awakening. Like not everyone, almost nobody knows how a car works, but we all know that cars work, and it doesn't matter, right? And it's, I think like if you've ever had a psychedelic experience or a transcendental experience with breathwork or meditation, typically those kinds of experiences are some kind of like building and building, where things seem less and less sensical until there's like a moment of realization. Like it's an event, and then after that is a new awareness. And in the collective consciousness concept, the same thing would be going on. So we have been intuiting this concept of money for thousands of years, collectively, our collective minds, trying to make sense of this thing and find that holy grail, and operating in a state of disorder and like a confusing state of disarray. But I think we're spiraling towards a moment where the awakening happens, and all of a sudden something becomes obvious for enough of us that all of a sudden all of the ideas we had before just don't make sense anymore. It's like that is what happens when humanity synchronizes to Bitcoin's metronome. It becomes like all of a sudden a pulsing signal that is impossible to ignore.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. But maybe going further along these lines, because I love these sort of notions of consensus. I like the idea of humans as nodes. What is Tibetan throat singing, and how do you learn how to do it?
Yeah, I went to a Tibetan throat singing workshop, and I'm disappointed to share them. My throat singing abilities are moderate to below average, but yeah, this it's a way of singing where you sort of like relax your throat and pass air through without and it produces almost like it sounds like a totally different thing. It's like turning your throat into an instrument. And when you hear it at first, if you haven't heard it before, like it sounds very different. Like it's got a very unique sound. And what the instructor at the workshop was telling us is this crazy phenomenon that happens with throat singing, where some people can just go be in the presence of someone else who can do it, and they can hear it, and they'll go to sleep, and the next day they will wake up and they can just do it. Like it's like an information packet that can be downloaded, like Neo knows Kung Fu. And it's a difficult thing to explain why that should be possible. And then I saw it happen. It happened to somebody at the workshop I was at. And like on the day 2, this guy could just do it. And it was totally wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story. Is Bitcoin the most viral idea ever?
I think so. I think we can measure its virality by looking at the 15-year price chart as a measurement of people who are paying attention to the metronome, instead of like, what is the financial value of that thing. It's also just a visualization of the ratio of buyers and sellers. And not everybody who owns Bitcoin understands it, but they are paying attention to it. And I think that, where I measure the virality of Bitcoin as an idea is the percentage of people who, when they understand it, become, obsessed with it. And that number's pretty high, right? Like it's a very deep rabbit hole, and it's a very like expansive and compelling thing. And then I think, like, most importantly, it solves a fundamental problem afflicting almost every person alive. And for that reason, when people understand it, it's so inspiring, right? That you can't help but spend your time thinking about what all of this might mean. And I think that I was talking about this morning in another Bitcoin, I work in Bitcoin. We talk about Bitcoin all day. It's like this information pack, Bitcoin, has encoded inside it something about it that makes you want to have other people understand it. And it's that thing, which is the thing that makes it viral, because we actually witness this over and over and over again. That's why there's like, I don't know how many thousands of Bitcoin podcasts there are right now. Like, it's a running joke on Twitter, right? But that's another like visualization of people feeling a compulsion to help other people understand this thing they've understood. And so, 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32, like, this thing is a ticking time bomb intellectually for this is a thing we're talking about now, is how I started thinking about the idea of the synchronization, and the idea that at some point it's like a gravity. It's the stronger it gets, the brighter the light is, and the harder it is not to look at. So like whenever Bitcoin does its next thing, where its next like really shocking thing, there will be, it's like the sphere of people who have to look at it is it growing, right? It's like this thing will become impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it's always incredible talking to you. It seems like Bitcoin synchronizes human consciousness, and it makes me hopeful that it'll bring on a golden age of reason. The world seems a little unreasonable and insane right now, so a lot hard to fathom. But when you tie it all together and the way you lay it out, helps you really think that through and think through time and just how you spend your time. So this has been so dope. I'll leave it to you to, leave us with any parting words and let us know where they can find you and explain a little bit about maybe what Block Rewards does and, for people listening.
Yeah. Thanks. And thanks again for having me on, man. It's a pleasure to rap with you. And I have been a fan of your show. I told you this the first time I met you in Montreal at Bitcoin Matrix. Was one of the first podcasts I really started listening to when I started this own journey of my own. Yeah. I mean, the talks, like you mentioned, are on YouTube for people who are interested. And my book, The Dao of Bitcoin, is available on Amazon. And the second edition of that is I'm hoping to have come out around the end of August. So I'll make an announcement about that if you're following. I'm on Twitter, Lantern Bitcoin, and Block Rewards is a company I co-founded 2 years ago, and we, I really, as I understood Bitcoin better and better. My background is in compensation and rewards and benefits and pensions. I think that as people in the workforce plan for the future, it's the same thing. It's this concept of the time that's consumed while you're working and being able to store that time so that you can convert it back into something you hope to use in the future and have some certainty and confidence about it. And that is what we're trying to do beyond just surviving. And so Block Rewards is a company mission driven to hyper Bitcoinize the way people get paid. And I think that, the virality of Bitcoin can actually transform how we imagine what we would be willing to trade our time for. And like today, even people who understand Bitcoin just think it's really cool when somebody like a professional athlete is willing to convert their paycheck to Bitcoin. And when we already all know that it makes way more sense to convert your money to Bitcoin as soon as you possibly can. And what we hope to do are create tools for employers to seriously be able to think about offering this, and it'll be something that I think becomes gradually and then suddenly. But it's like one of these, if you build it, they will come. So we want to build the world that we want to see. And so we are starting by, building these tools that will enable a new way of thinking about the energy that is exchanged when somebody goes to work. And our mission statement is harmonizing the energy exchange of value creation. So our entire goal here is to solve for employers and employees a problem that's neither of their fault. Like people need more higher salaries all the time because the money's broken, and that's not the company's fault. And these are more problems that are just downstream of the money system that we've been forced to use, the pyramid money, the all-seeing eye. We're in Canada right now, targeting a launch in the US by the end of the year, hopefully early in Q4. And so you can find us at blockrewards.ca and shortly blockrewards.com.
Awesome. Can't wait. Definitely having you back, especially for the second edition. And I'll see you at the Canadian Bitcoin Conference, if not sooner.
Yes, sir.
So thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bitcoin Matrix. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions or thoughts you may have. We'd love to hear from you. You can support the show by checking out our sponsors and affiliate links in the description. It helps keep bringing you great content while connecting you with awesome products that I believe in. Share this episodes with your friends, family, or anyone curious about Bitcoin. And let's keep growing this community together. Stay curious, keep stacking, and I'll catch you in the next one.